In this section, we're going to be connecting React and Redux, but before we can do that, we are going to refactor quite a few things. So right now we have this one really big file, and it's not even part of the Webpack build for our real application. It's sitting inside of the Playground folder. We need to go ahead and fix all of that. So we're going to be breaking everything out of this file, and we're going to be moving it elsewhere inside of the source folder. Now, step one is going to be to create a few new directories for these files. We're going to favor many small files over one big one. And the first folder we're going to create in the source directory is actions. In here, we're going to have files for our actions. So we'll have two. We'll have one for our expenses actions and one for the filters actions. Another folder that we're going to have inside of source is going to be reducers. As you can probably guess, we're going to store our reducers inside of there. And there are just two more we're going to be creating. Another folder inside of source is going to be store. In there, we will configure our Redux store. And last up, inside of source, we're going to have selectors. And selectors are going to refer to things that actually query the data from the Redux store, like the function we created down below. Right here, we have get visible expenses. This is going to go ahead and live over inside of selectors. We're going to be breaking all of this up into multiple files. Let's go ahead and kick things off. Step one is going to be to pull out our action generators. So we're going to make a new file inside of actions. This one is going to be called expenses, expenses.js. And in here, we're going to store the action generators for expenses. I'm going to shut down the Redux 101 file, the destructuring file, and the Webpack config file for the moment, just to clean up some space. So over here, what do we have? We have add expense, we have remove expense, and we have edit expense. I'm going to take all three of these, cut them out of this file. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to copy them from the file and I'll paste them over here. I'll leave the old file intact. So we have these three functions over here, and there are actually very few dependencies. We just need UUID, so we can add the import for that. I'm going to import UUID from UUID. And then all we need to do is actually set up exports. Now we have three things, so I'm going to set all of these up as named exports, which means that we can just toss export in front of all three const definitions. I'm going to export three named exports. Now when we want to grab them, we can just import this file and grab the ones we need. So we have expenses done. Let's go ahead and create the other actions file we're going to need. This one is going to be filters.js. Filters.js will store the action generators for our filters. Down below, we have 5 of those right here. We have everything from end date all the way to set text filter. I'm going to copy all of those, take them over to the filters file and paste them in. Now you'll notice there are actually 0 dependencies here, so there is no need to import anything. We also don't need React. We have no JSX, so we can leave the file as is, except for the fact that we do need to set up the exports. I'm going to add export before all of the const definitions. Excellent. Once everything is exported, we are all done with these two files. For the moment, we can just go ahead and close them down. We'll revisit them a little bit later when we actually import them. So we have actions in place. The next thing we're going to do is create 2 files in reducers. Inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and set those up. The first one will be expenses. This is going to be for the expenses reducer, so expenses.js. And down below, we're going to grab that reducer as well as the default state value. I'm going to grab all of that, copy it, and paste it over to the reducer file. Now, for this particular case, we can go ahead and figure out what makes the most sense in terms of exporting. I'm going to go ahead and use a default export since there really is just one thing I want to get out of here. That is the reducer function. So I can use export default expenses reducer, or I could just add that up above, which is what I'm going to do. So right here, I'll just remove the const definition, export default, followed by the arrow function. Now down below, we don't have any dependencies, and this is a pure function, so that should be the case. We now have the expenses file all wrapped up. We have the default export set up, so we can move on to the other reducers file we're going to need. This one is going to be for the filters reducer, so I will call this one filters.js. I'm going to grab the reducer as well as the default object and the comment, grabbing all of this stuff, copying it, and pasting it over. Once again, we just need to set this up as the default export. I'm going to remove the const definition, export default. Perfect. That is it for the reducers. They now all live in their own file. And once again, we'll revisit these when we actually import them and connect everything. Next up, we have our get visible expenses function. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new file inside of the selectors folder. I'll call this one expenses.js. I'm going to take my one function, copy it, and paste it over there. Now I can set this up as the default as well if I'd like, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I will export by default the following function. Now once again, there are no dependencies inside of here. All we're using is various built-in methods on strings and arrays. We're not using any sort of library, so there is no need to import anything, no JSX, so no need to import React either. We can go ahead and close down this file, and the last thing we need to do is set up the store directory, and this is where we're going to start pulling everything together. So in here, I'm going to create a single file called configure store.js, and this is where we're going to set up the store configuration, which is simple for now, but will get a bit more complex later on. So that is just the code right here. I'm going to take this, copy it, and paste it into the new file. Now here we do have some dependencies. We need a few things from Redux, create store and combine reducers, and we also need to grab the reducers that we just moved into the reducers directory. So how are we going to get that done? We're going to get that done with a couple of imports. First up, I'm going to import a few named exports from Redux. We have create store, and we have combine reducers. Two things we already know how to use, and we're going to grab those from the Redux library. Down below, we now need to go ahead and grab our reducers. Remember, we set those up as default exports, so I can import right here, expenses, reducer from. Now I want to go out of the store folder into the reducers directory, and in there I have expenses. Awesome. Now I am going to go ahead and change the capitalization of that E, expenses, reducer, perfect. We also have our filters reducer. We are using that, so we got to import it. Import filters reducer from. We already have that file set up. We're going to go out of the store folder into the reducers directory, and sitting right there, we have the filters file. We are going to make a few small changes to this one. Right here, we're going to go ahead and export by default a function. And for the moment, this function isn't going to take any arguments. All we're going to do inside of here is create our store. Then we're going to go ahead and return it. So I will return the store we just created. Now, this means that when we import the function, the default export from configure store, we just call it, we get the store back, and then we can go ahead and actually use it. So there we have it. Configure store is all done, and it's now actually ready for us to use. In order to actually use this file, we have to first make sure we run Webpack correctly. Right now, we're still running the file in the playground folder. Instead, I'm going to run app.js, which is sitting right inside of the source directory. I'm also going to shut down the Webpack file and restart the development server over in the terminal. And once it is up and running again, we are now going to be running the real application, which means that back inside of Google Chrome, what are we going to see? We are going to see our actual React components for the first time in quite some time. And now what we're going to do is actually start pulling everything together by importing stuff inside of app.js. This is where we're going to really connect React and Redux. For the moment, we're just going to create a new store and make sure all of our imports and exports were set up correctly. First up, we're going to go ahead and import the default export we just set up, which I'm going to call configure store. And we're going to grab that from the file we created. So from the relative folder, it is in the store directory, and there we have a single file configure store. Now down below, we can create a const store, and we can get its value as the return value from configure store. And this is going to give us access to all of the stuff we've used before: store.dispatch, store.getState, store.subscribe. So let's go ahead and do just that right here. I'm going to set up a single call to store.getState. I am then going to take the call, wrap it in parentheses, and toss a console.log up front. Now I can go ahead and save app.js. The browser is going to go ahead and refresh. And what do we get over here? We are indeed getting the default state, which is a great first step. Here, we've basically proven that the reducers, the store file, they've all been set up correctly. We have the exact same setup we had previously. Now what I'd like to do is actually grab some of the actions and grab the selector and make sure those are working as well using the new setup. Now this is actually going to be your challenge for the video. So to kick things off, you're going to use add expense to add an expense with a description of something like water bill. Then you'll add another expense with a description like gas bill. And then you're going to go ahead and use one of the action generators from the filters file, maybe set text filter. And we can use a text filter of bill. Now, when we do this, we should see both expenses. So that's going to be the final thing you're going to do. Down below, you will use the get visible expenses function, and you're going to print those to the screen. Print visible ones to the screen. Now, by default, when we search bill, we should see 2 items. Then you can go ahead and switch that up to something like water, in which case you should just see the 1 item. So take some time to knock all of this out. Make sure you are seeing the correct data over in the console when you do get those visible expenses. Remember, you're going to need to add some new imports for all of the functions you're using. Take a moment to pause the video, test your work, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. All right, how'd that one go? I'm going to kick things off by grabbing the imports that I know I'm going to need. So first up, I need add expense and I need set text filter. Those are both named exports, import, add expense, from, and we want to go into the actions folder. In there, we have the expenses file. We also need to do the exact same thing for set text filter, importing set text filter from inside of the actions folder, the other file, the filters file. And the last thing we need to import is the get visible expenses function. Now, if you remember, I set that one up to be a default export. So we're going to go ahead and grab it as such. Import get visible expenses. We're going to grab that from the file that we just created inside of the selectors folder. We have just a single file, expenses. Perfect. So now that we have everything imported, we can actually start using it. I'm going to go ahead and add my first expense. So store.dispatch, add expense. And I mentioned we only need to worry about the description for these examples. So I can go ahead and just toss that in description. And the first one is going to be water bill. Perfect. Now, before I even create the second one, I can just save the file and make sure at least this much is working. Over here, I do indeed have one expense showing up in the expenses array. It has all of the data I would expect, just the one thing we actually set, which was the description. I'm going to duplicate this line to create my second expense, the gas bill expense. Right here, gas bill. And now we're going to go ahead and actually set a text filter. So I'll use one more, store.dispatch call, set text filter. Now I will set the text filter to something along the lines of bill at first. And we can make sure that at least gets set correctly. I'll save the file. Over inside of the console, we can check out the filters object, and we do indeed have bill for the text. Now we actually want to get the visible expenses. So we're going to go ahead and do just that. I'll make a const called state, and I will use store.getState to get the current state. You could have also put this in a subscribe call to be reactive. Either way works. And right here, we are going to create a const for the visible expenses. And we are going to set this equal to whatever comes back from get visible expenses. So we're going to call that function. We're going to get the return value and we'll eventually print it to the screen. We have to pass the 2 pieces of information in, the expenses, state.expenses. And we also have to pass in the filters, state.filters. And once we've passed both of those in, the last thing we're going to do is just dump it to the screen. So console.log right here, visible expenses. Now we can remove all of the challenge comments, save the file, and see exactly what we get back. What are we going to get? We get an array with both items still showing up. Water bill and gas bill both have the word bill inside. Then I'm going to go ahead and tweak the text filter over to water. If I do that and save the file, we should just have the one showing up, and that is exactly what we get. Right here, we can see only water bill was kept, gas bill wasn't kept because it no longer matched the text filter. Now that we have all of this in place, we're actually in a really good position to actually connect React and Redux. Everything is all set up, and in the next video, we're going to start taking the first steps towards connecting the two. I'm very excited to get to that, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.